Hello everyone, Rebecca here, Regulated Canadian Immigration Consultant and the Operations Manager at Moving to Canada. Today we're going to dive into one of the biggest immigration updates of the year, which is Canada's new Immigration Levels Plan. If you've been following our updates lately, you will know that the plan shapes everything from how many new permanent residents Canada aims to welcome to what's changing for temporary residents like workers and students. This video, I'm going to be breaking down all that for you. I'll walk you through the key numbers, what's new for both permanent and temporary residents, and what these changes could mean if you are planning your move to Canada. In this year's plan, like last year's, Canada is once again including targets for both permanent and temporary residents for 2026, and as well as setting notional targets, that is suggested targets, for 2027 and 2028. For 2026 specifically, the plan is aiming to welcome about 380,000 new permanent residents to Canada and roughly 385,000 temporary residents. If we look back at what last year's plan expected for 2026, the PR numbers are holding steady, so there's no major change there. But the real story is on the temporary side. These numbers have dropped significantly from about 517,000 set as last year's projection for 2026 to an actual target of 385,000. That is a big shift, and we're going to unpack what's behind that number later on in the video. For now, let's zoom in on the permanent resident side and look at what's new in the plan. Here's a quick look at the permanent resident target numbers for 2026. Now I know there is a lot of numbers on your screen. Let me walk you through some of the key insights from this year's PR admissions plan. First of all, let's talk Express Entry. Express Entry is one of the biggest pathways to Canada under the economic immigration category. So Express Entry and its related programs all fall within the box called Federal High Skilled Category, which includes the Federal Skilled Worker Program, the Federal Skilled Trade Program, and the Canadian Experience Class. One thing you're going to notice straight away is that ISCC have dropped the separate in Canada focus and the Federal Economic Priorities category, rolling everything under the Federal High Skilled category, which is what it was prior to last year. This does not mean that these initiatives are gone. That just means that they've merged under one bigger umbrella to give ISCC more flexibility. It's about streamlining rather than removing. It allows ISCC to adjust their targets as their priorities shift. And when we look at the numbers, the Federal High Skilled category has been allocated 109,000 spots for 2026. Now that is a bit lower than the combined total in 2025 for the In Canada Focus and the Federal Economic Priorities, which was around 125,000 spots. So in short, there has been a small drop in the available spaces for the Express Entry system. Up next, what is up with category-based draws? As a quick refresher, category-based draws invite candidates for permanent residency based on specific skills or experience that match Canada's economic priorities. Unlike last year's plan, this one does not spell out which categories will be used. It just notes that the Immigration Minister has the authority to create and adjust them as needed. For now, we can expect the 6 existing categories to stay, so French language proficiency, health and social services, STEM, trade, agricultural and agri-food, and education. ISCC has hinted that these categories may be extended for 2026, possibly adding areas like leadership and senior management, researchers and scientists, and even highly skilled military recruits. So we'll have to wait and see whether those 3 new proposed categories make it into the 2026 list. Moving on, let's talk about Provincial Nominee Programs, or PNPs. In the previous immigration levels plan, PNPs took a massive hit when Canada slashed their target by almost 50% down to 55,000. But now they are making a comeback. The target for 2026 is set just above 91,000 and is set to climb slightly over 2027 and 2028 to 92,000. This shows that provinces, for the next few years at least, will have a bigger role in shaping Canada's economic and immigration future. And honestly, the signs that this was going to happen were there. So through our PNP live tracker, we saw provinces ramping up their draws in September and October. Then on October 16th, Immigration Minister Lena Diab confirmed it. She announced the plans to boost PNP allocations so that provinces have more control over their regional labour needs. While this is great news, it won't lead to an instant urge of new permanent residents. As of October 9th, there were around 110,000 applications in the backlog for PMP programs. Even with the faster express entry linked programs, many candidates invited in 2026 won't likely become permanent residents until 2027, 2028. Most of the spots for 2026, so most of the increased spots, will go to applications already in the system. It may mean that those applications will get faster processing, but for actually filling the spots, anyone invited in 2026 will likely go to those increased 2027, 2028 numbers. But overall, it is very good news if you're looking for a PMP. Finally, we don't yet know how ISCC will distribute this new PMP allocation amongst the provinces, and even how the provinces will distribute their allocation between the various programs that they do have. One thing we can see, though, is when we take a look back across the years, is that provinces have generally favoured their own immigration programs versus the express entry system aligned programs. We may see more allocations go to the non-express entry programs, but we will see more PMP activity in 2026 thanks to this increased allocation. The next big update is one a lot of you have been very excited about. It really blew up our socials. Is the news about the possibility of an accelerated pathway to PR for work permit holders. The government said that it plans to roll out a one-time measure to help up to 33,000 work permit holders transition to permanent residency in 2026 and 2027. The idea is that it's going to make it easier for those who have already built ties to Canada to finally become permanent residents. So it's super exciting, but we also have to take a step back and really look at what we actually know, what we don't know, before we decide that this is the one for us. Here's what we know about the program so far. The program will likely open to current work permit holders already in Canada, with a particular focus on those working in a specific in-demand occupation, with priority going to rural areas. So that's very specific. It is expected to create around 33,000 spots in 2026 and 2027 for eligible applicants to apply for permanent residency. But there's still a lot we do not know about this program. So we don't know whether the 33,000 spots will be issued only in 2026 or split between 2026 and 2027. We don't know when the program will open or close. We don't know what the exact program requirements will be, what documents you will need to apply. It's still unclear whether IRCC will target specific occupations. They do say in-demand sectors. Will they use a first-come, first-serve approach like the previous TRTP PR program, or will they opt for this expression of interest style thing? We don't know yet. So for now, it's a really promising sign that Canada wants to help transition those working in Canada to permanent residents. We just don't know much about the program. So remain optimistic, but also don't put a pause on your current immigration plans on the hope that this one might pull through. As soon as we do have updates on this new program, we will cover them for you. If you want to stay ahead of the curve, make sure you subscribe to Moving to Canada's newsletters. We post daily immigration news, updates, practical tips for newcomers or those already living in Canada. So if you want the latest scoop the moment it drops, just be sure to subscribe. Go to movingtocanada.com. The very first thing you'll see is a sign-up box. Enter your email address, click join now, and you'll be part of our community, being informed of all these major updates. Finally, let's touch French immigration. This group has really dominated express entry in 2025 with over 36,000 invitations issued to this cohort. It is huge. It's bigger than any other draw type, any other draw category. It really does reflect the strong focus on the French language proficiency that we're seeing. Under this new plan, that focus is not going away, but the target for 2026 has shifted slightly. It's been reduced from a notional target of 9.5 to an actual target of 9%. It's a small decrease, but a decrease nonetheless. It could signal that ISCC are aiming to maintain that focus rather than expand it after we have seen a record-setting year in 2025. That said, French, in my opinion at least, is still worth considering. There are still roughly 30,000 spots available. That is the same size as this proposed TR to PR program that everyone's getting excited about. So that's not something that should be dismissed. If you are able to learn French, if you're able to strengthen any French that you have within the next year or two, it still may be a great strategic move to bring you one step closer to your long-term Canadian immigration goals. Let's shift gears and talk about temporary residence. One of the biggest headlines is the sharp pullback in the overall temporary resident target for 2026. Under the previous plan, the notional target for 2026 was about 517,000, and now that's been reduced to 385,000, and it doesn't stop there. The numbers are expected to dip slightly again in 2027 and 2028, settling at 370,000. The most affected group by far is going to be international students, facing the steepest reductions. So under last year's plan, Canada was expected to welcome almost 306,000 international students in 2026. That number has now been cut in half to 155,000 in 2026. Now, before we start to panic and rule out Canada as the destination for study, it's really important that you put those numbers into context. These lower targets do not signal new restrictions. They are actually more of a reflection of what's happening already. The latest data does show that there's been a significant slowdown in the number of new study permit arrivals. These new targets simply align with the current trends versus new restrictions placed on international students. I don't know if that makes it better or worse, but we should see it more as like a business as usual compared to a massive decrease in the number of students arriving. Shifting over to the work permit side of things, the overall allocations are lower than 2025. For 2026, Canada is targeting around 230,000 work permit holders compared to nearly 368,000 in last year's plan. This total is split between two groups, the International Mobility Programme or IMP and the Temporary Foreign Worker Programme or TFWP. Let's start with the International Mobility Programme. At first glance, the IMP seems to have taken a massive hit, dropping from 286,000 in 2025 to 170,000 in 2026. But there's some really important context behind those numbers, as there always is. So one key change this year is that post-graduation work permits are now excluded from these figures. IICC now classifies all postgraduate work permits as extensions or status changes, not new arrivals. And the tricky part is that we don't really know exactly how postgraduate work permits were treated in a previous plan, and that really makes it hard to say whether there's a real drop or just a change in how things are being measured. Let me explain this a bit more. If a graduate applies for a post-graduation work permit from inside Canada, that is an extension. Yeah, I'm okay with that. But if they're outside of Canada with no Canadian status and get approved to return on a post-graduation work permit, that looks more like a new arrival. That's where the data gap happens, making it tough to tell if we're seeing fewer people come through the IMP or just new accounting of those people. There's also a structural change coming. Employer compliance for the IMP is going to move from IICC to the Employment and Social Development Canada, so ESDC, and that's the body responsible for employer compliance under the Temporary Foreign Worker Programme. It just makes sense. Both under the same governing body that reviews them, makes it more streamlined, more consistent. Moving on to Temporary Foreign Worker Programme or TFWP. Now this programme has had a very turbulent year with growing public criticism and calls from some to shut it down completely. But IICC really do seem to be taking a light-handed approach, scaling it back rather than scrapping it altogether. Allocations under the Temporary Foreign Worker Programme are expected to drop from 82,000 in 2025 to 60,000 in 2026 and then further down to 50,000 in 2027 and 2028. Again, if you look at the statistics behind how many people are arriving under the Temporary Foreign Worker Programme, it should be seen more in line with what's happening on the ground. The number of Temporary Foreign Worker Programmes coming into Canada is aligned with what we're seeing for the goals of 2026. And last but not least, it looks like Canada may soon reopen the door to US H-1B holders through a new temporary immigration pathway. The goal is to strengthen Canada's innovation ecosystem, address labour shortages, and attract top talent in areas like healthcare, research, and advanced industries. Ottawa says that the programme will launch in the coming months, but no firm dates or eligibility details have been released. This move obviously comes at a time where the US has tightened H-1B visa rules, adding higher costs and just general uncertainty for applicants. It seems like Canada is taking this chance to attract some of that skilled talent. And it's not the first time that Canada has done this. Back in July 2023, the government launched an open work permit pilot for H-1B holders, allowing them to live and work anywhere in Canada for 3 years. The 10,000 allocation cap closed within days, if not hours. If it does reopen, you can expect very high demand for the limited number of spaces available. For now, the only details though is that we can expect it to launch in the next couple of months. So we will share an update with you guys as soon as we have more information from ISCC. If there's one big takeaway from anything we've talked about today, it's that ISCC is going to continue to prioritise people already in Canada, whether you're applying for permanent residency or here temporary on a study or work permit. On the PR side of things, the trend is clear. Those who are already in Canada with Canadian experience continue to have an edge. If you're in the express entry system already, make sure your profile stays active and competitive. Keep your language scores and your work experience up to date, because you never know when ISCC might roll out a new opportunity through various programs or the categories that we've mentioned earlier. Also, it's imperative that you're going to keep an eye on provinces in 2026. With a higher PMP allocation, they'll have more flexibilities to select candidates that match their regional labour needs. Research where your skills are in demand and align your strategy with those local opportunities. Another question we're going to see coming up is whether there's going to be a return of general or all programme draws this year, and the short answer is probably not. The new plan does not point in that direction, and based on current trends, it's really unlikely that ISCC are going to open that kind of once again. It's not to say that it won't happen, but the reality is if it does, the CRS cutoff is going to be very high. That's why we're going to continue saying that we recommend that you focus on category-based draws, if you can, improve your French, and really explore provincial nominee programs in 2026 if it's not something you've already done. Finally, shifting to the temporary resident side of things, the message is pretty similar. It's about being more strategic. For students, that means choosing a program that is going to lead to an in-demand occupation or stronger post-graduation pathways. For workers, it's going to be about gaining Canadian experience in in-demand industries like healthcare, STEM, skilled trades, things like that. Above all, don't panic about these reduced targets. These changes do not mean that Canada is closing its doors. It simply reflects what's currently happening and a more targeted approach. If you stay informed, intentional, and adaptable, there are still plenty of pathways for you to make your future here in Canada. Okay, that is it for today's video. It was a long one. Thank you for sticking with me. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to share it with a friend. Drop a comment if you have any questions. We're going to link to all the relevant resources in the description in case you want to read more. We've covered the immigration levels plan really extensively, so I highly recommend taking a look through some of our articles covering this, which really go into a lot of detail about the various sections and whatnot. As a quick plug, make sure you subscribe to our newsletter for the latest immigration updates, tips, program news straight to your inbox. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next one.